out with our top focus story this morning. Setting an example after the winter washout in Parliament, BJD MP Jai Banda has announced returning his salary in proportion to the time wasted due to non-transaction of any business in Parliament. So Jai Banda, they're trying to set an example over there. We know that very little business was transacted inside both houses of Parliament during this winter session between November 16 to December 16. It was a complete washout of a session. Only a couple of legislations which were passed in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha respectively. That discussion over demonetization, which was the demand of the opposition from the start on November 16, did not happen at all in either houses within those 21 sittings of both houses of Parliament. It was a virtual washout of a session. Nothing was transacted, and now BJD MP Jai Banda from the Lok Sabha setting an example, saying he is willing to return his MP salary proportional to the time wasted inside Parliament. It remains to be seen how many parliamentarians are willing to follow in Mr. Banda's footsteps, follow the example that has been set by him, but definitely a very heartening example being set forward by Jai Banda, who's tweeted about the fact that he is willing to give up his salary proportional to the time which has been wasted inside both houses of Parliament. Like I was saying earlier, absolutely no business transacted. A couple of legislations in the Lok Sabha, like the IT Amendment Bill, like the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill, which was passed first in the Rajya Sabha, the only business transacted, in fact, in the Rajya Sabha, and then passed in the Lok Sabha as well, and the supplementary demand for grants. Only these legislations. My colleague Abhimanyu Sharma on the phone line with me. Abhimanyu, definitely a very positive, in fact, example being set by Jai Banda.
Well, exactly a positive example indeed set by him, especially in light of the fact that there were several demands made by different MPs across political parties, not just from the ruling coalition or from the opposition, but across party lines. There was an opinion amongst parties. That they should give up salaries if they are not able to transact business in the house, if they are not able to deliver for which they have been elected to power by the people as representatives of the public at large. Also,
Abhimanyu, just hold that thought, because Mr. Jai Banda himself is on the phone line with us right now. Mr. Banda, you've suggested that you're willing to give up your MP salary proportional to the time wasted and lost inside both houses of Parliament during this winter session. What exactly prompted this gesture?
Actually, I have been doing this for several years now.
Right.
At the end of every session, based on the percentage of time that was lost due to disruptions, I have been returning my salary and daily allowance.
All right.
It is a symbolic gesture. Obviously, this is it's not going to make a fundamental difference to the huge amounts of money which is being wasted. But it is a symbolic gesture on my part, because it is unconscionable for us to not let the House function. You know, even though I don't personally disrupt the House, I have never disrupted the House in my 16 years.
Right.
But this is my own way of making a gesture.
Mr. Banda, who do you hold responsible for the fact that this session was completely washed out as a result of first the opposition and then at some points the Treasury benches disrupting both houses?
Look, I don't want to use the time to point fingers at people. I have been making the point that there is a deeper problem. It is not just the opposition versus government. The deeper problem is that our Parliament functions on a system of consensus, which was common in the 19th century, which doesn't work anymore. When you have 36 parties in Parliament, any party can withhold consensus, and therefore the agenda cannot be agreed, and so there is disruption. All modern legislatures, even in the UK and the US and all, they work on the basis of strict rules, and we must have those strict modern rules, so that instead of consensus, you know, the whole dispute, this solves the problem.
Absolutely. Mr. Banda, I'd request you to please hold that phone line with us. Mr. Sandeep Dixit of the Congress Party also joining us on the phone line. Mr. Dixit, what do you think of this gesture by Mr. Banda to give up his MP salary proportional to the time wasted and lost in Parliament this session?
It's his decision, and I think it's a good. I think it's a good gesture. Of course, whether it makes a difference, or whether everybody else should follow it or not, is not the issue. I think I heard one part of what Jayabhai said, and I think it's important that somebody makes a gesture to at least say that, look, even parliamentarians feel the fact that time is lost. And I can also tell you that, while many parliamentarians and members of parliament may be, responsible for not letting days function, actually, by and large, MPs do want parliament to function. And sometimes I think it's their bosses in different parties, I'm speaking a little dispassionately at this time, who are actually much more responsible in not letting parliament function than members of parliament.
When you say bosses, who are you? You're referring to both the opposition and the treasury benches.
Let's just say bosses, because sometimes I'm in the opposition, sometimes somebody else is in the opposition, and that behavior doesn't change. So, you can't say that any one party has had an exemplary, behavior over years. Everybody has done their little bit of using this whole issue of not letting parliament function. Unfortunately, what happens is that, sometimes bad behavior in Lok Sabha or Raj Sabha actually gets rewarded electorally. So, there is, I think that is also a very serious issue. If actually people find that, far better, or we are much more responsive, or, people hear us more, or believe that we are a good opposition only because we disrupt parliament or we say things in a particular manner, then, we do sometimes get swayed by the way our electorate kind of, expresses itself electorally. And sometimes that can also be a factor that makes us behave perhaps a little more irresponsibly than we would otherwise.
Right. Mr. Dikshit, please hold the phone line. Mr. Panda, would you agree that sometimes bad behavior does get rewarded by respective political parties?
My good friend Sandeep Dikshit and I agree on many things, but this is one area I don't agree, because I think it is a misunderstanding. Yes, it is true that when the BJP was in opposition, they disrupted and they won, and now maybe that is why the Congress is disrupting. But I don't think the reason for the victory was because of disruption. To be honest, I don't think constituents are very focused on what members do in Parliament. They are looking for other aspects based on which they make their decision. So I think it is a confusion. It is a confusing correlation to causation. I think more and more as the country is getting more middle class, more access to television and internet, more and more Indians are disgusted by this kind of disruption of Parliament. I think it will be counterproductive.
Let's get in a voice from the BJP as well. National Secretary Siddharthnath Singh on the phone line with us. Mr. Singh, what do you think of Mr. Panda's gesture first? He's basically offered to give up his MP's salary proportional to the time wasted and lost in Parliament.
Well, it's a good step that Mr. Panda has taken. And it shows that, yes, there are voices now being raised that the Parliament should not be disrupted unnecessarily. If there is an issue which helps in the national building, then, yes, the Parliament can be, the disruptions can be raised, which is a democratic process also. But at the same time, when you don't have an issue the way the current Parliament was washed out, because the opposition didn't really wanted to debate on demonetization.
But towards the end, we also saw the Treasury benches stand up and raise slogans around Iceland and other issues.
I don't agree there, because the Treasury benches wanted the debate. We saw in the Rajya Sabha that Manmohan Singh was given the time to speak out, but the minute Manmohan Singh finished his speech and the Treasury benches wanted to speak, Congress didn't allow the Treasury benches to put their viewpoint. And then in the Lok Sabha, realized it that Mr. Rahul Gandhi would be speaking, and
right. We seem to have some problem with that audio connection with Mr. Singh. Mr. Panda, who do you hold responsible for the functioning of Parliament? Because we know that some veterans of the BJP itself, like L.K. Advani, like Mr. Shantakumar, raised certain objections to the way Parliament was functioning, and they said that it was the Speaker and the Centre's responsibility to have Parliament function.
It's not that simple, because our parliamentary rules, as I told you, are from the 19th century, which says Speaker's discretion. But basically what that means is that the Speaker is guided by the Business Advisory Committee, which is the floor leaders of all the 36 parties.
Right.
And even if one party does not agree, what happens is that causes disruption. It's not fair for us to expect the speaker to exercise discipline because even though there are many all-party resolutions regarding discipline, whenever she exercises the discipline, those very parties, they start complaining and they say that the speaker is being authoritarian. So that's not fair. We must have clear-cut rules. Look, the government was not agreeing to a voting discussion. And why should they agree? They don't want to be embarrassed. There is no requirement for a voting discussion because it is consensus. So that's why there must be a simple rule that if 100 members sign for a voting discussion, there must be a voting discussion.
Absolutely. In fact, that is one of the very constructive points that you've made. I'll take that with Mr. Sandeep Dixit, actually, who's on the phone line with us as well. Mr. Dixit, thank you so much for holding on to that phone line. One of the suggestions being made by Mr. Panda is because the debate was around under which rule will this discussion on demonetization actually take place in the Lok Sabha, whether it will be with voting, whether it will be without voting. What he's suggesting, get signatures down. 50 members if they vote for non-voting, and there are 100 members if you want voting. So let's get to a consensus point and not just keep debating Rule 56 versus Rule 183 or Rule 194 constantly inside the House.
No, I think this point is, quite well taken that, sometimes what does happen is that because of the so-called discretion of the speaker, which often is not really the discretion of the speaker, and very often the speaker is also directed or dictated or influenced by the ruling coalition. Because please remember, the speaker ultimately has to go back to that party, and, the speakers also change their profession, can go back to government, and also they are under influence. Whether it should be 50 things, what Jay Panda ji has done is made a suggestion, and I think it's an intelligent and a bright suggestion to the fact that if you have systems that reduce discretion in critical and crucial matters, then certainly, there will be more occasions in which Parliament will function because, if there is a rule, people follow most of that. So I think that's a welcome suggestion. In what form, in what manner, I think that's something, obviously anybody can debate and there is no final correct suggestion for anything, but I think it's a welcome move if something like this can happen.
Mr. Panda, there is, of course, you've pointed out to the fact that you've been doing this for years together. This is not the first time that you've made an offer of this nature. But there is that, obviously everyone does laud the gesture that you've made, but there are people who would say that you're probably affluent enough. Like there are members of parliament who are speaking about this. You're probably affluent, you're well-to-do. You can possibly give up your salary. Not everyone can do that because they're coming to parliament, they're attending. They're not probably the ones like yourself who are inside the well disrupting, raising placards, but business doesn't get transacted possibly because of some other member of parliament. So how are they to be held responsible?
No, they are correct. I must admit I'm fortunate that I have been born in circumstances in which I can afford to give this money back. So that's why I'm not imposing my morality on anybody else.
Right.
This is my conscience. My conscience does not permit me to draw the salary and allowances for the period for which Parliament was disrupted. And you are right, there are many others who have, they have not disrupted and they feel why should they be penalized? They have a point there.
Right.
So I think each member has to make his or her mind up depending on their own economic circumstances and conscience and the role they have played in making Parliament function or to disrupt it.
Do you think that any kind of penalty should be imposed of members of Parliament who are seen to be consistently disrupting the House?
Yes. Again, on the issue of removing discretion and making it rules-based, I have suggested that, the Speaker is finding it difficult to impose the penalties because the parties are pushing back. So if you write it into the rules that if a member comes into the well, he will be expelled for the day. And if the member comes into the well for a second time during the session, he will be expelled for the session. If we write this into the rules, then there is no speaker's discretion. It will be like a game of football where you have a yellow card, red card.
Yeah.
Sort of discipline is necessary.
Just like Mr. Akshay Yadav, in fact, got a warning card of sorts, really, because he threw some papers towards the speaker's chair.
Yes, but when an individual member does it, speaker can enforce discipline. But when entire parties and when entire groups of parties are disrupting, speaker is very diffident about enforcing discipline because she faces a lot of criticism from the parties. That's why we must remove the discretion. We must write it into the rules. Automatic expulsion if you go into the
Okay, we seem to have some trouble and disturbance in that audio connection with Mr. Jay Panda. So him setting the example over there and saying, I'm willing to give up my MP salary for the time lost and wasted inside Parliament. But that is, of course, his individual gesture, symbolic gesture. He says not everyone needs to follow in his footsteps. My colleague Abhimanyu Sharma on the phone line, in fact, live with me from New Delhi on this story as well. Abhimanyu, what is the sense that you're getting? Are all members of parliament willing to, in fact, follow in Mr. Panda's footsteps? Because there is some amount of objection saying, well, good on him, but the fact is not everyone is as affluent or well-to-do as Mr. Panda to give up their member of parliament salary. Okay, Abhimanyu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, Abhimanyu, what I was asking you is that what is the broader sense for the kind of gesture that Mr. Panda is making? He's making a symbolic gesture, he admits. But the fact is that there are some who are questioning that gesture in the sense that they agree with the intent behind the gesture. But the fact that they might not be able to themselves follow in the same, some saying he's affluent enough to possibly make this gesture, some saying, why should we give up our MP salary? I attended parliament every day. I was there willing to do business. There were others who were disrupting. Why should I be penalized? Okay. We'll try and reconnect with Abhimanyu later on that story. But Jai Panda, of course, they're setting an example for members of parliament to follow. A symbolic gesture, but definitely a positive gesture. Nonetheless, a member of parliament conscientious of the fact that parliament has not transacted any business and not done its duty towards the people of India in the washout that it actually orchestrated